There's a quiet understanding that comes with age, isn't there? You learn that the loudest silences often happen around a crowded dinner table, and the most painful truths can be delivered in the innocent voice of a child. You think you've built walls around your heart, sturdy and tall, crafted from years of experience and quiet resilience. You believe you know who you are, what you've earned, and the price you paid for it. And then, in one fleeting moment, over a plate of cooling roast beef and polite conversation, a single sentence can dismantle it all, brick by painful brick. For me, that moment arrived on a crisp autumn Sunday, a day that began with the warm, familiar scent of my sister Margaret's cooking and ended with the cold, bitter taste of misunderstanding. The family was all there. It was my mother's birthday, and we'd gathered at Margaret's house in Oak Haven, the small town we both still called home, though our lives within it had traced vastly different paths. Her home was a picture of domestic success, sprawling, a little chaotic, filled with the echoes of children's laughter and the scent of potpourri. My brother-in-law, Tom, was at the head of the table, holding court about local politics, his voice a comfortable, rumbling bass. My mother, looking frail but happy, was seated to his right, smiling at her grandchildren. And then there was me, Eleanor, the maiden aunt, the career woman, slotted into the chair at the end of the table, a familiar position I'd occupied for 2 decades. I had driven down from the city, a tower journey I made for every significant family occasion. My car, a deep sapphire blue sedan, was parked in the driveway, gleaming under the porch light. It was my prize, my testament. Not a flashy sports car, but a solid, reliable, beautiful machine that represented more than just transportation. It was the culmination of 30 years of relentless work, of late nights and early mornings, of sacrifices Margaret and her family would never truly comprehend. The dinner conversation ebbed and flowed. We talked about the weather, about my mother's garden, about my youngest nephew Leo's progress in school. He was 8 years old, a bright boy with his father's eyes and a complete lack of filter, as most children have. I was in the middle of telling a rather dull story about a new software implementation at my firm when Leo, who had been staring out the dining room window, suddenly pointed a sticky finger towards the driveway. His voice, clear as a bell, cut through the low hum of conversation. "Aunt Eleanor," he said, not to me, but to the table at large. "That's your car, right?" "The blue one." I smiled, a genuine warmth spreading through my chest. "It is, sweetie. Do you like it?" He nodded enthusiastically. Then he turned to his mother, his expression one of simple, childish curiosity. "Mom," he said, his voice carrying the unshakable authority of a recently learned fact. "You said Aunt Eleanor borrowed it from her boss." The clatter of my fork hitting the china plate was the only sound in the room. It seemed to echo, amplified 100 times in the sudden, crushing silence. Every eye turned to me. I felt the color drain from my face. It was as if a spotlight had been switched on, pinning me against the wall, exposing something I didn't even know I was hiding. I looked at my sister, Margaret. She wouldn't meet my gaze. Instead, she busied herself by dabbing a non-existent stain on the tablecloth with her napkin, a faint blush creeping up her neck. "Leo, that's not. We don't talk about things like that at the table," she mumbled, her voice tight with embarrassment, but not with remorse. There was no denial. No quick, "Oh, you must have misheard me, honey." There was only the quiet, damning confirmation in her avoidance. Tom cleared his throat, attempting to steer the conversation back to safer waters. "So, Eleanor, this new software, is it user-friendly?" But his words were just noise. I couldn't hear them. All I could hear was Leo's innocent pronouncement, replaying in my mind. "Mom says you borrowed it from your boss." It wasn't just a lie. It was a story. A narrative my sister had constructed about me, about my life, and was passing down to her own children. The narrative was that I, at 57 years old, was still not truly independent. That my success was a facade, a borrowed thing, dependent on the generosity of a man in a position of power. The implication was so deeply insulting, so profoundly dismissive of my entire life's journey, that I couldn't breathe. My car. My beautiful blue car. I thought of the day I bought it. I had walked into the dealership alone. I had negotiated the price myself. I had written the check from my own savings account, an account I had painstakingly built over 30 years, an account that had seen lean times and prosperous ones, an account that was a testament to every promotion I'd earned and every bonus I'd been awarded. The car wasn't just metal, glass, and rubber. It was my 3 a.m. project deadlines. It was the lonely takeout dinners in my office. It was every missed wedding, every baby shower I couldn't attend because of a crucial meeting. It was the quiet pride of knowing that I had built a life for myself on my own terms, without a husband, without a safety net. It was my declaration of independence. And my sister had reduced it to a favor, a handout from my boss. I looked across the table at her. Margaret, who had married her high school sweetheart at 22, who had never held a full-time job, who had built her life around bake sales and PTA meetings. I had never once judged her for her choices. I had admired her dedication to her family. I had bought her children expensive birthday gifts, contributed generously to their college funds, and always showed up. I had thought we had a quiet respect for our different lives. But in that moment, I saw that I had been wrong. She didn't respect my life. She pitted it. She had to invent a fiction to make it palatable, to fit it into her worldview where a single woman couldn't possibly achieve that level of success on her own. It had to be a loan, a gift, a charity case. "Excuse me," I whispered, my voice a raw, unfamiliar thing. I pushed my chair back, the legs scraping against the hardwood floor. The sound was violent in the stillness. I couldn't stay there. I couldn't look at the pity in my mother's eyes, the awkward discomfort on my brother-in-law's face, or the self-righteous flush on my sister's cheeks. I walked out of the dining room, my steps feeling strangely heavy, as if I were wading through water. I grabbed my coat and my purse from the hall tree, my hands trembling. "Eleanor, wait," Margaret called after me, her voice finally laced with a hint of panic. "He's just a child. You're overreacting." I stopped at the front door, my hand on the cold brass knob. I turned to look at her, and for the first time in years, I let her see the truth of what I was feeling. Not the polite, accommodating Eleanor. Not the successful, unflappable Aunt Eleanor. Just the raw, wounded heart of a woman who had just had her life's work casually dismissed by the one person she thought should have been her biggest champion. "He is a child, Margaret," I said, my voice shaking with a cold, quiet anger I hadn't felt in decades. "But he didn't invent that story. You did. You told him that. And I just need to understand why." She had no answer. She just stood there in the warm, golden light of her perfect home, her mouth slightly ajar. The silence stretched between us, a chasm that had been dug, I now realized, over years of unspoken resentments and divergent dreams. I opened the door and stepped out into the cold autumn night, the slam of the door behind me feeling like a final, definitive closing of a chapter one never even knew we were writing. The 2-hour drive back to the city felt like a journey across a barren planet. The familiar highway became a foreign landscape, each mile marker a tombstone for a memory I once held dear. The interior of my car, usually a sanctuary of quiet comfort, felt like a cage. The scent of new leather, which I had once associated with accomplishment, now smelled of accusation. Every hum of the engine, every smooth transition of the gears, seemed to mock me. "Borrowed," the tires whispered against the asphalt. "Borrowed, borrowed, borrowed." I replayed the scene at the dinner table over and over, each time feeling the sting as if it were fresh. Leah's innocent face. Margaret's guilty blush. My mother's worried frown. It wasn't just the lie itself that was so devastating. It was the casualness of it. It implied this wasn't a one-time slip of the tongue. It was a story she told, a narrative she had woven into the fabric of her family's understanding of me. Who else had she told? Her friends? The other mothers at school? Was I the subject of her pitying conversations, the cautionary tale of the woman who chased a career and ended up alone, having to accept charity from her employer? My mind spiraled back through the years, searching for the origin of this rift, this deep, cavernous misunderstanding between us. Margaret and I had shared a bedroom for 16 years. We had whispered secrets into the darkness, planned our futures, promised to always be there for each other. Our dreams were different, even then. She drew pictures of houses with white picket fences and filled notebooks with the names of her future children. I read books about science, history, and far-off places. I dreamed of boardrooms, not playrooms. I wanted to build an empire, even if it was a small one, with my own 2 hands. I remembered the day I left for college. She had cried, clinging to me at the bus station. "Don't forget about us, Elle," she'd sobbed. And I hadn't. Or at least, I didn't think I had. The first few years were a struggle that Margaret never witnessed. My scholarship covered tuition, but not much else. I worked 2, sometimes 3 part-time jobs. I was a waitress at a greasy spoon diner where the smell of stale coffee clung to my clothes. I shelved books in the university library until it closed, the silence of the stacks a welcome respite from the chaos of my life. My first apartment was a tiny, drafty room with a hot plate and a shared bathroom down the hall. I lived on instant noodles and day-old bread from the bakery where I sometimes worked the early morning shift. During those years, Margaret would call me. She'd tell me about her dates with Tom, about their engagement, about the colors she'd chosen for her wedding. Her life was a series of joyful, traditional milestones. Mine was a relentless grind. I missed her bridal shower because I had a final exam I couldn't fail. I could only afford to fly home for the wedding itself by using a month's worth of meager savings. I stood at her wedding in a simple dress I'd sewn myself, watching her float down the aisle, and I felt a pang of something I couldn't name. It wasn't jealousy. It was a deep awareness of our diverging realities. She was stepping into a life that was pre-written, a story of love and family. I was still struggling to write my own first chapter, and the ink was cheap and the paper was torn. After college, I got a low-level administrative job at a small accounting firm in the city. The pay was abysmal, but it was a start. It was a foot in the door of the world I wanted to join. I was determined. I was the first one in the office and the last one to leave. I took on the projects nobody else wanted. I studied for my certification exams at night, my tiny apartment lit by a single desk lamp. The city sounds a distant hum. I remember one specific Christmas, about 5 years into my career. I was 28. I had been working on a massive year-end audit that was incredibly complex. My boss, Mr. Henderson, a stern but fair man, had told me that if I could pull it off, a promotion was in the cards. It meant working straight through the holidays. Margaret called me on Christmas Eve, the sounds of carols and children's laughter in the background. Leo had just been born. "Eleanor, aren't you coming home?" Mom is so disappointed. Her voice was laced with that familiar tone of gentle reprimand. "I can't, Maggie. I'm so sorry. This project, it's everything. It's always a project, Eleanor. What's more important than family? Than your first nephew's first Christmas?" I tried to explain the stakes, the opportunity, the future this could build for me. But she couldn't hear it. To her, I was choosing spreadsheets over family. I was choosing ambition over love. We ended the call on a strained note. I spent that Christmas day alone in the fluorescent glare of the office, eating a sandwich from a vending machine, the silence of the empty building pressing in on me. When I finally got that promotion a month later, I called to tell her the good news. "Oh, that's nice, dear," she'd said, her voice distracted. "Listen, can I call you back? Leo has a bit of a fever." The pattern was set. My triumphs were nice. My sacrifices were selfish. Over the years, the distance grew. Not in miles, but in understanding. I climbed the corporate ladder, slowly, painstakingly. From junior accountant to senior. From senior to manager. I bought my first small condo. I started traveling for work. My life was full, but it was full of things she didn't value. She would tell me about Tom's promotion at the local hardware store, and in her voice, it was an achievement equal to my making partner at my firm. Because his success supported a family. Mine, in her eyes, supported only myself. It was a lonely success. Therefore, it was a lesser success. And slowly, I began to curate the version of my life that I presented to them. I downplayed the big deals, the stressful deadlines. I talked more about the plays I saw or the books I was reading. I didn't want to make her feel like her life was small, so I made my life seem smaller than it was. I didn't want to sound like I was boasting, so I shrouded my achievements in humility. And in doing so, I had inadvertently created a vacuum. A space of unknowns about my career, my finances, my independence. A vacuum that Margaret, with her own insecurities and judgments, had filled with a story of her own making. A story where I wasn't a success, but a charity case. A story where my beautiful blue car, the symbol of my solitary, hard-won victory, was just a loan from my boss. The tears that I had held back at the dinner table finally came, hot and furious. I had to pull over onto the shoulder of the highway, the flashing hazard lights painting the dark interior of the car in rhythmic, pulsing bursts of orange. I wasn't crying because my sister lied. I was crying for the young woman who ate stale bread and dreamed of a better life. I was crying for the woman who missed her nephew's first Christmas to secure a future for herself. I was crying for the 30 years of relentless, lonely effort that had been so easily, so cruelly erased. My sister hadn't just insulted my car. She had invalidated my entire existence. She had taken my life story, a story I had written in sweat and sacrifice, and she had edited it into a tragedy. The days that followed the disastrous birthday dinner were steeped in a profound and heavy silence. The phone, which usually carried my sister's weekly call, remained quiet. The chasm that had opened at the dinner table did not close. It widened, fed by unspoken words and festering hurt. I went to work, sat in meetings, analyzed financial statements, and moved through my life like an automaton. But underneath the surface of professional composure, a storm was raging. Margaret's lie had become a splinter in my mind, and with every passing day, it burrowed deeper. I found myself questioning everything. Had I made a mistake by being so private about my struggles and successes? In my effort to avoid seeming boastful, had I accidentally presented myself as weak? I scrolled through photos on my phone, pictures from family gatherings over the years. There I was, always on the periphery, smiling, present but somehow separate. The successful aunt who flew in from the city, bearing gifts, a visitor in a world of domesticity. I saw myself through Margaret's eyes for the first time, a solitary figure, a puzzle she couldn't solve. And instead of asking the questions, she had simply invented the answers. About a week after the incident, I sat down and composed an email to her. I wrote and rewrote it for hours. I tried to explain the journey. I wrote about the freezing apartment and the 80-hour work weeks. I wrote about the terror of being laid off during a recession in my early 30s and the grit it took to start over at a new firm. I wrote about the quiet joy of signing the mortgage papers for my condo, my hand shaking, but my signature firm. I wanted her to see the scaffolding of my life, the sweat and tears that held it all together. I wanted her to understand that my car wasn't just a car, it was a monument. But as I read the final draft, a wave of exhaustion washed over me. Why was I, the wronged party, the one who had to plead my case? Why did I have to justify my own life to my sister? It felt like another performance, another attempt to win the approval I shouldn't have to be begging for. With a heavy sigh, I deleted the entire message. An explanation wasn't what I needed. What I needed was an apology. A real one. And I knew, with a certainty that settled like a stone in my gut, that I wasn't going to get it. The silence stretched into a month. The vibrant colors of autumn bled into the bleak, gray palette of early winter. I found myself becoming a ghost in my own life. I'd walk past my car in the parking garage and feel a pang of shame, as if the lie had somehow tainted the truth. I started taking the subway more often, leaving the car, my beautiful symbol of triumph, to gather dust in its designated spot. Margaret's fiction had become a strange, intrusive reality, coloring my perception of my own hard-won possessions. The breaking point, as it so often does in families, came not with a confrontation, but with a crisis. I got a call one Tuesday morning from my brother-in-law, Tom. His voice was strained, stripped of its usual jovial tone. My mother had had a fall. She was in the hospital in Oak Haven, conscious, but they were running tests. She had broken her hip. I left work immediately, my mind a blank canvas of fear. I didn't even think about which car to take. I just ran to the garage, got into my blue sedan, and drove. The tower journey was a blur of adrenaline and prayer. The petty anger I felt toward Margaret evaporated, replaced by the primal fear of losing a parent. When I arrived at the hospital, I found them in the dreary, beige waiting room of the orthopedic wing. Tom was pacing. Margaret was sitting hunched in a plastic chair, her face pale and tear-streaked. She looked up as I walked in, and her eyes, red-rimmed and full of fear, met mine. In that moment, we were not two women on opposite sides of a divide. We were just two daughters, terrified for our mother. I sat down next to her, leaving a small, polite space between us. For a long time, we didn't speak. We just listened to the rhythmic beeping of unseen machines and the squeak of nurses' shoes on the linoleum floor. The silence wasn't angry anymore. It was heavy with shared anxiety. Finally, Margaret spoke, her voice barely a whisper. The doctor said the surgery went well, but at her age, recovery is the hard part. She's strong, I said, the words feeling inadequate. She's always been strong. Another long silence. Then, she turned to me, and the look on her face was one I hadn't seen in years. It was vulnerable. Defeated. Eleanor, she began, her voice cracking. I am so sorry. I waited, my heart hammering against my ribs. When Tom called you, she continued, twisting a crumpled tissue in her hands. My first thought, after worrying about Mom, was, how is Eleanor going to get here? I know it's stupid, but I pictured you trying to get a bus or a train from the city, and I felt this awful panic that you wouldn't make it in time. And then I looked out the window and saw your car pull up, and She trailed off, taking a shaky breath. And you what, Margaret? I asked, my voice gentle but firm. She finally looked at me, and tears were streaming down her face. And I felt so ashamed. So profoundly, deeply ashamed. Because I knew you'd get here. I knew you would handle it. You always do. You've always been the one who handles things, the one who gets things done. And I think that's what I could never understand. It wasn't the apology I had expected. It wasn't about the car. It was about something much deeper. I didn't lie because I think you're a failure, Elle, she sobbed, the words tumbling out in a rush. I think I lied because I'm intimidated by your success. My whole life, my identity, is tied up in Tom and the kids. My worth is measured in how well our family functions. And you built a whole world for yourself. All by yourself. When I look at your life, your condo in the city, your important job, that car, I don't see a failure. I see someone who didn't need any of the things I needed. Someone who didn't need a husband to be secure, who didn't need children to have a purpose. And it scared me. It made my world, my choices, feel small and fragile. She looked down at her hands. Telling Leo the car was borrowed, it was a horrible, petty thing to do, and I hate myself for it. But it was easier than explaining the truth. It was easier than telling my son that his aunt is more successful and more independent than his own mother will ever be. It was my insecurity, not your life, that I was describing. I'm so sorry. I sat there, stunned, as the truth of her confession washed over me. All this time, I thought she pitied me. But she hadn't. She had envied me. Or rather, she had been confounded by me. My independence, which I saw as a necessity born of circumstance, she saw as a formidable, almost alien strength. Her lie wasn't designed to hurt me. It was designed to protect herself from her own feelings of inadequacy. It was a poorly built shield against the glare of a life she couldn't comprehend. I thought of all the years I had made myself smaller for her benefit, and I realized that it hadn't helped. It had only created a mystery, a blank space that her insecurities had rushed in to fill. I reached out and, for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I took my sister's hand. It was cold and trembling. You're not small, Maggie, I said softly. You built a home. You built a family. You filled that home with love. That's not a small thing. That's a different kind of empire. Tears welled in my own eyes, but they were not tears of anger or hurt. They were tears of release. The splinter that had been lodged in my soul for a month finally dissolved. But my life, I continued, squeezing her hand, the one I built, it's real. The struggles were real. And the successes, they are mine. All mine. She nodded, sobbing quietly. I know, Elle. I know that now. In the sterile, impersonal quiet of that hospital waiting room, surrounded by the scent of antiseptic and the fear for our mother, my sister, and I finally began to see each other clearly. Not as a collection of choices and achievements, but as two women who had taken different roads, each with its own set of blessings and its own hidden costs. The road back to understanding was going to be long, but for the first time, it felt like we were finally on it together. The weeks that followed were a blur of hospital visits, hushed conversations with doctors, and the slow, arduous process of my mother's recovery. Margaret and I became a team, a role we hadn't truly shared since we were teenagers. We coordinated schedules, took turns sitting by Mom's bedside, and fell into an easy rhythm born of shared purpose. The deep wound between us had been lanced, and in the shared space of our mother's vulnerability, it began to heal. There were no more grand confessions or tearful apologies. Instead, our reconciliation came in small, quiet moments. It was in the way Margaret would have a hot coffee waiting for me when I arrived at the hospital after my long drive. It was in the way I would listen, truly listen, as she talked about Leo's soccer game or her daughter's anxieties about high school. We started talking about the substance of our lives, not just the surfaces. One afternoon, as Mom was napping, Margaret and I sat in the bleak hospital cafeteria, stirring sugar into styrofoam cups of tea. "You know," she said, staring into her cup, "I never asked you about your work." "Not really." I just heard accounting and my mind went blank. I smiled. "It's more interesting than it sounds. Sometimes." And so I told her. I didn't talk about it in terms of money or titles. I told her about the satisfaction of finding a critical error in a massive ledger, like solving a complex puzzle. I told her about a young entrepreneur I had mentored, helping him secure funding for his dream business. I told her about the stress, yes, but also about the pride of leading a team, of being trusted with immense responsibility. I painted a picture not of my success, but of my purpose. As I spoke, I saw a new understanding dawning in her eyes. She wasn't just hearing about a career, she was hearing about a life. A life with its own challenges, its own victories, and its own unique form of fulfillment. "Wow," she said softly when I finished. "You really built something, Elle." "I never saw it that way." "And you built something, too," I replied, meeting her gaze. "We just used different tools." The day my mother was finally discharged, a frail but determined version of her former self, was a day of quiet celebration. I had driven down to help Margaret get the house ready and to drive Mom home. As we were helping her slowly and carefully out of the hospital, Tom went to bring the car around. Margaret's minivan was practical for a wheelchair, but as we stood on the curb, my sapphire blue sedan pulled up instead. Tom was in the driver's seat. He hopped out and opened the back door for Mom. Margaret looked at me, a question in her eyes. "I figured it would be a smoother ride for her," I said simply. As we settled Mom into the back seat, Leo, who had come along with his father, ran a small hand along the gleaming blue door of my car. He looked up at me, his 8-year-old face serious. "Aunt Eleanor," he said, his voice quiet, "Dad told me this car is all yours. He said you worked really, really hard for a long, long time to get it." I felt a lump form in my throat. I looked over at Margaret, who was watching the exchange, a soft, sad smile on her face. She had done more than apologize. She had corrected the narrative. She had given me back my story. I knelt down to be at eye level with my nephew. "He's right, Leo," I said, my voice thick with emotion. I did. And every time I drive it, I remember that hard work. It feels good. He nodded, processing this new information with the gravity only a child can muster. "It's a really nice car," he concluded. "It's my favorite color." "Mine too," I whispered. On the drive back to Margaret's house, a comfortable silence filled the car. My mother dozed in the back, the pain medication making her drowsy. Tom drove, and I sat in the passenger seat, watching the familiar streets of Oak Haven slide by. This time, the hum of the engine didn't sound like an accusation. It sounded like a quiet, steady heartbeat. It was the sound of my life. A life that had been lonely at times and difficult and misunderstood. But it was my own. Later that evening, after we had gotten Mom settled, I prepared to drive back to the city. I stood in the driveway, my keys in my hand, the crisp night air cool on my face. Margaret walked me out. "Drive safe, Elle," she said. "I always do," I replied. We stood there for a moment in the glow of the porch light. There were still so many things left unsaid, so many years of distance that a few weeks in a hospital couldn't fully erase. Our lives were still profoundly different, our paths unlikely to converge. But the chasm of misunderstanding was gone. In its place was a bridge, newly built and perhaps still fragile, but a bridge nonetheless. A bridge of respect. "Eleanor," she said, her voice soft. "Thank you. For everything. For Mom, and for, There's nothing to thank me for, Maggie," I said. "We're sisters." I got into my car and started the engine. As I pulled out of the driveway, I saw her in my rearview mirror, standing there, watching me go. She raised a hand in a small wave. I waved back. The highway stretched out before me, a dark ribbon illuminated by my headlights. The journey ahead was the same one I had made 100 times before, but everything felt different. The anger and hurt had been replaced by a quiet, settled peace. The car no longer felt like a symbol I had to defend. It was simply a part of me, a tangible piece of my history. It was the vessel that had carried me through loneliness and struggle, and now it was carrying me toward a future where I was finally, truly seen. The road ahead was still my own, a solitary path under a vast, starry sky. And for the first time in a long, long time, I felt truly, unequivocally, in the driver's seat of my own life. You learn, as the years pile up, that the most significant battles aren't always fought with raised voices or angry words. Sometimes, the declaration of a new war arrives quietly, in a crisp white envelope, smelling faintly of antiseptic and bureaucracy. The fragile peace my sister and I had brokered in the shadow of our mother's hospital bed was only a few months old, a delicate, unseasoned thing. It was real, but it had not yet been tested by the mundane, grinding pressures of real life. That test arrived on a Tuesday, delivered by the mailman. It was a bill, or rather, a stack of them. The itemized statements from the hospital, the surgical group, the anesthesiologist, and now, the rehabilitation facility where my mother was slowly, painstakingly learning to walk again. I had offered to handle the paperwork, a natural extension of my role as the family's resident expert in all things numerical and complicated. I had spread the documents across my large dining room table in the city, the same table where I had eaten so many solitary meals, and I began the grim task of adding it all up. I've spent my life looking at numbers. They are the language I understand, the framework upon which I have built my entire career. I can read a balance sheet the way a musician reads a score, discerning the harmony, the discord, the underlying story. But these numbers told a story I didn't want to read. The totals at the bottom of each page were staggering, far beyond what I had anticipated. After the insurance company's portion was subtracted, the remaining figure was still a mountain. A steep, intimidating peak that our family was now expected to climb. My first call was to Margaret. The newfound ease between us was still a novelty, and I approached the conversation with a caution that had become second nature. I didn't want to frighten her. "Hi, Maggie," I began, trying to keep my voice light. "I've got the first round of Mom's bills here." "Oh, heavens," she sighed. The sound of children, or perhaps the television, was a low hum in the background. "Is it bad?" I hesitated. How do you tell someone whose biggest financial worry is the rising cost of groceries that a figure with 5 zeros is now their problem? "It's significant," I said, a masterful understatement. The insurance covered the bulk of the surgery, but the rehab stay and the copays are adding up quickly. I've been looking at Mom's savings account. I trailed off. My mother was a child of the Great Depression. She was frugal to a fault. She reused tea bags, saved bits of string, and had a cookie jar full of carefully saved cash for a rainy day. For her entire life, she believed she had saved enough. But her savings were from a different era, a time when a few $1,000s felt like a fortune. Against the brutal reality of modern healthcare costs, her life savings were a handful of sand against a tidal wave. They would be gone in a matter of months. Her savings won't cover it? Margaret's voice was small, laced with disbelief. But she was always so careful. She was Maggie. But this is a different world. Once her savings are depleted, we'll have to figure out what comes next. And that's before we even start talking about the cost of in-home care when she's finally released. There was a long silence on her end of the line. I could picture her standing in her kitchen, her hand on her hip, that familiar worried frown creasing her brow. The kitchen that was always warm and smelled of baking bread. The kitchen that was the heart of a life built on love and community, but not on financial planning. "Well," she said finally, her voice taking on a falsely cheerful tone. "We'll just have to chip in. Tom and we can tighten our belts. I'm sure we can come up with something." I closed my eyes, the cold, hard numbers on the papers in front of me mocking her good intentions. I knew what tightening their belts meant. It meant cutting out the weekly pizza night. It meant Leo wearing his cousin's hand-me-down sneakers for another season. It would amount to a few $100s a month at best. A single drop in an ocean of debt. The reality was this: I was the only one who could make a meaningful difference. My life of solitary work, of missed holidays and lonely dinners, had resulted in a portfolio of investments, a healthy 401k, and a savings account that could actually withstand a blow like this. My success, the very thing that had been a source of such bitter misunderstanding between us, was now the only lifeboat in sight. And as that realization settled upon me, a cold, unwelcome feeling began to creep in. It was the ghost of our old dynamic, resurrected not by envy or pity, but by cold, hard cash. I could solve this problem. I could write a check and make the mountain disappear. But in doing so, would I not be confirming the very narrative Margaret had once invented? The narrative of me as the wealthy benefactor, the one whose resources were so vast they could simply absorb the problems of others. The balance we had just found felt like it was tipping again, and this time, the weight was all on my side of the scale. "We'll talk more this weekend," I said, my voice weary. "I'll drive down. We need to look at everything. Together." "Okay, Elle," she said, her voice full of a relief that pained me to hear. "You always know what to do with this stuff. It'll be okay now that you're on it." I hung up the phone and stared at the bills. "It'll be okay now that you're on it." She meant it as a compliment, as a vote of confidence. But it felt like a burden. The same burden of competence I had carried my entire adult life. Only this time, it wasn't just my own future I was carrying. It was the weight of our entire family. And it felt heavier than ever before. The drive to Oak Haven that Saturday felt different from the last. The anger was gone. The raw wound had scarred over, but a new kind of anxiety had taken its place. It was the dull, heavy dread of a problem with no easy solution. I parked my car, our car, I now thought of it, a tool for the family, in Margaret's driveway, and took a deep breath before going inside. The last time I had come here to discuss a difficult topic, it had ended in disaster. I prayed this time would be different. We decided to talk at Mom's house. It seemed fitting. The small, tidy home she had lived in for over 60 years was silent now, a museum of a life temporarily put on hold. The air was stale, carrying the faint, sweet scent of her rose-scented potpourri. We sat at the small, formica-topped kitchen table where we had done our homework as children, the stack of ominous white envelopes between us. Tom was there too, his presence a steady, quiet support for Margaret. I laid it all out. I used a yellow legal pad, drawing columns and writing down figures in my neat, precise script. I explained the costs, the shortfall from insurance, the projected monthly burn rate of Mom's savings. I tried to be clinical, to treat it like a business problem, but the subject was our mother, and the lines on the page represented the slow erosion of her life's security. When I finished, Margaret just stared at the pad, her face ashen. Tom rubbed his temples, a deep line of worry etched between his brows. "So, her savings will be gone by April," he said, his voice flat. "And that's if there are no other complications." "Correct," I confirmed. "And the rehab facility says she'll need, at minimum, 6 months of part-time in-home care after that. A few hours a day. That's another expense we haven't even factored in." Margaret finally looked up, her eyes wide with a dawning panic. "So, what do? We can't just not pay it. What happens?" "They'll go into collections," I said gently. "It will destroy her credit. They could put a lien on this house." The word house hung in the air. We all looked around the small kitchen, at the faded floral wallpaper, the worn linoleum floor, the ancient stove our mother refused to replace. This house was more than just a building. It was the repository of our entire childhood. It was the Christmas mornings and the scraped knees. It was the smell of our father's pipe tobacco, long since faded but still present in our memories. It was the one constant, unchanging anchor in all our lives. I can cover the immediate shortfall, I said, bringing the conversation to the point I had been dreading. I can transfer the money to her account to pay the current bills. Margaret's shoulders sagged with relief. Oh, Elle, would you? That would be a lifesaver. But Tom, ever the pragmatist, was frowning. Eleanor, that's a huge amount of money. We can't ask you to do that. It's not about asking, I said, my gaze fixed on my sister. I'm offering, but we need to be realistic. This isn't a one-time fix. The costs will continue. My savings are not infinite. This is a temporary solution. So, what's the long-term one? Margaret asked, her voice trembling slightly. I took a deep breath. This was it. The precipice. The only significant asset Mom has, I said, trying to keep my voice even, is this house. The reaction was immediate and visceral. Margaret recoiled as if I had slapped her. Sell the house? Absolutely not. This is her home. This is our home. She's coming back here. We can't sell it out from under her. Maggie, be realistic, Tom said gently. Even when she comes home, can she live here alone? The stairs, the upkeep, it's a lot. We'll manage, she insisted, her voice rising. I'll come every day. The kids can help. We'll make it work. We are not selling this house. She turned to me, her eyes flashing with a familiar fire I hadn't seen since the disastrous dinner. Is that your solution for everything, Eleanor? Just write a check or sell something. This is our history. It's not just an asset on a balance sheet. The accusation hit me like a physical blow. It was the old argument, dressed in new clothes. I, the cold, calculating career woman from the city, reducing their sacred family home to a line item. And she, the guardian of emotion and memory, defending it from my heartless pragmatism. It's not heartless, Margaret. It's reality. I shot back, my own voice rising in frustration. Her name is on the deed, and her name is on the bills. The money has to come from somewhere. Do you think I want to sell this house? I grew up here too. But I am not going to watch everything she worked for be eaten away by interest and penalties because we're too sentimental to make a hard choice. It's easy for you to talk about selling it, she cried, tears welling in her eyes. You have your own beautiful place in the city. You left all this behind years ago. For me, for Tom, and the kids, this house is. It's the center of everything. It's where Mom is. It's where we come for every holiday. Losing it would be like losing her all over again. Her words gutted me. She was right. I had left. I had built a separate life, a separate home. My connection to this house was rooted in the past, in nostalgia. Hers was in the present, a living, breathing part of her daily existence. For me, selling it was a painful but logical financial transaction. For her, it was an amputation. The fragile piece had shattered. We were right back where we started, standing on opposite sides of a canyon carved out by our different lives, our different values, our different fears. Tom sat between us, a helpless referee in a fight that was decades in the making. The numbers on my legal pad seemed to mock us, their cold logic indifferent to the storm of emotion they had unleashed. My offer to help, to use the very success she had once resented, had led us straight back to this impossible place. I had the means to save our family from financial ruin, but the price, it seemed, was the one thing my sister could not bear to pay. The argument left a bitter residue in the air of our mother's house. We retreated into stony silence, the unbridgeable gap between my logic and Margaret's emotion yawning between us. Tom, bless his heart, tried to mediate. He made coffee. He talked about the weather. But the tension was a thick, suffocating blanket. I felt a familiar despair settle over me. We had come so far only to be tripped up by the same fundamental differences that had always defined us. I spent the rest of that weekend in a haze of frustration. I went to visit Mom at the rehab facility, putting on a brave, cheerful face for her. She was frail, but her spirit was fighting. She asked about the house, about her garden, about when she could come home. Each question was a small knife in my heart. How could I tell her that her home had become the central battleground in a war between her daughters? On Sunday evening, as I prepared for the drive back to the city, I knew I couldn't leave things as they were. Another extended, angry silence would fester and turn toxic. I found Margaret in the living room of her own house, curled up on the sofa, staring blankly at a television screen that wasn't even on. I didn't sit down. I just stood in the doorway. "We can't leave it like this, Maggie." She didn't look at me. "I don't know what else to say, Eleanor. I will not agree to sell her home." "I know," I said softly. And in that moment, I realized I had been just as rigid as she was. I had seen the problem as a financial equation, and the house was the variable that made it solvable. I had failed to see the emotional weight, the human cost of my own logical solution. My world was about finding the most efficient path from A to B. Hers was about preserving the path itself, no matter how overgrown or difficult it became. "I've been thinking," I continued, walking further into the room. "There might be another way. It's not as clean, and it's not a permanent fix, but it might buy us time. It might buy us a better choice down the road." She finally looked at me, a flicker of hope in her tired eyes. "What is it?" "It's called a reverse mortgage," I began. I explained the concept in the simplest terms I could. How Mom could borrow against the equity in her home, receiving monthly payments or a line of credit to cover her expenses. The loan wouldn't have to be paid back until she either passed away or permanently moved out of the house. "So, she could stay in the house?" Margaret asked, sitting up straighter. "And get the money she needs for care?" "Yes. It would mean the house would eventually have to be sold to pay back the loan after she's gone. Or if she ever had to move to a permanent nursing facility. The estate would settle the debt. But it would keep her in her home for as long as she is able. It would solve the immediate cash flow problem without an immediate sale." I also explained the downsides. The high interest rates, the fees, the fact that it would eat away at the inheritance we might have one day received. "It means there will be less left for us, for your kids," I finished. "Maybe nothing at all." Margaret looked at me, her expression unreadable for a moment. Then, a slow, genuine smile spread across her face, the first I had seen all weekend. "Eleanor," she said, her voice full of wonder. "Do you really think I care about the inheritance? I just want my mother to be okay. I just want her to be home." The simplicity of her statement struck me with the force of a revelation. All this time, I had been operating on the assumption that we all had the same underlying financial goals. I had been trying to preserve the asset. But Margaret's asset wasn't the house's market value. It was the value of having our mother sleep in her own bed, surrounded by her own things. My clean solution of selling the house protected the money. My new, more complicated solution protected the person. "Okay," I said, a wave of relief washing over me. "Okay, I'll do the research. I'll find a reputable lender. I'll handle the applications. We'll present it to Mom together." The following weeks were a flurry of activity. I dove into the complex world of reverse mortgages with the same tenacity I applied to my work. I spent hours on the phone, vetting companies, comparing rates, reading fine print. Margaret, in her own way, was just as busy. She was project managing the house, organizing a small army of neighbors and church friends to build a ramp over the front steps and install grab bars in the bathroom. She was turning her home into a safe harbor for our mother's return. We were a team again, each using our unique skills, our different tools, to build a solution. The day we drove Mom home was one of the happiest days of my life. She was fragile, yes, and moved with the slow, deliberate caution of someone who has learned to mistrust their own body. But she was home. As we helped her into her favorite armchair in the living room, her eyes scanned the familiar space, and a look of profound peace settled on her face. Later, Margaret and I sat at the kitchen table again, the same table where we had argued so fiercely. This time, instead of bills, it was covered with seed catalogs. Margaret was already planning Mom's spring garden. "You know," I said, tracing the image of a bright red tomato with my finger. "That day at dinner, when Leo said what he said, I thought you saw my life, my success, as something cold and sad." Margaret looked up from her catalog, her expression thoughtful. "I think I saw it as something lonely," she admitted. "But I was wrong. It's not lonely. It's resourceful. Your resourcefulness is what's letting Mom sit in her own living room right now. Your lonely life is the reason our family is going to be okay. She reached across the table and patted my hand. It turns out we needed your empire after all. I smiled a real, unburdened smile. Her words were a gift, a final, healing balm on an old wound. She didn't pity me. She didn't envy me. She finally, simply, appreciated me. As I drove back to the city that evening, the lights of the highway blurring into long, hypnotic streaks, I thought about the nature of wealth. For 30 years, I had measured my success in numbers on a statement, in the solid, tangible reality of my condo and my car. But the events of the last few months had taught me something profound. The true measure of wealth isn't what you can buy for yourself. It's what you can do for the people you love. My success hadn't isolated me from my family. It had become the very tool that allowed me to serve them in their time of greatest need. My life hadn't been a solitary pursuit after all. It had been, in its own strange way, a contribution to an empire I hadn't even realized we were building together. The empire of family. Life, I've learned, is not a straight line. It's a tapestry, woven with threads of joy and sorrow, conflict and reconciliation. For the longest time, I believed my thread was separate from the main design, a solitary gold strand running parallel to the vibrant, chaotic pattern of my family. But the crisis with my mother had been a powerful, shaking hand on the loom, forcing my thread to cross and weave into the others, creating a new picture I was only just beginning to understand. The peace my sister and I had found was not a fragile truce, but the beginning of a stronger, more resilient fabric. 2 years passed. 2 years of my mother's slow but steady recovery. 2 years of a new, quiet rhythm between Oak Haven and the city. My drives down the highway were no longer missions of crisis management or tense obligation. They became journeys of choice, of want. The sapphire blue sedan, once a symbol of my solitary struggle, was now simply the vessel that carried me toward a life I was becoming an integral part of. It carried groceries for my mother, birthday presents for my nephews, and on more than one occasion, a bottle of wine to be shared on Margaret's porch after a long week. The garden at my mother's house, which had been the subject of our hopeful planning in the bleak hospital cafeteria, was now in riotous, glorious bloom. On a warm Saturday in late spring, I found my mother sitting on her new, comfortable bench, a gift from Tom and Margaret, simply watching the bees dance among her prize-winning roses. At 82, she was more fragile, her movements more deliberate, but her eyes held a clarity and contentment that had been absent for years. I sat down beside her, handing her a cool glass of lemonade. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, a language we had always shared. "You know, Eleanor," she said, her gaze fixed on a particularly vibrant crimson bloom, "your father and I, we worried about you." I was surprised. My parents, products of a generation that kept their anxieties close to their chest, had rarely voiced such things. "Worried why?" I asked. "We saw how hard you worked," she continued, not looking at me. "Harder than anyone. We were so proud, but we saw that you were alone in it. Margaret had Tom. She had her friends, the church, the whole town. You had that big city. It seemed so vast and impersonal. We worried that your success would build a wall around you so high that no one could get in." Her words were so close to the truth of how I had felt, it took my breath away. "I think, for a while, it did," I admitted quietly. "Or maybe I built the wall myself." She finally turned to me, her hand, thin and spotted with age, covering mine. "A wall can be a fortress, dear, but it can also be a prison. I'm just so glad you found the gate." She patted my hand and turned back to her roses. "That Margaret," she said with a little shake of her head. She always saw the wall. It took her a long time to see the gate. Later that afternoon, I was in Margaret's kitchen, helping her chop vegetables for a family barbecue. The movements were easy, familiar. We worked in a comfortable tandem that would have been unthinkable just a few years ago. There was no longer a need to curate my stories, to downplay my life. I told her about a difficult client I was dealing with, and she listened, offering not solutions, but sympathy. She told me about her frustrations with my middle nephew's sudden desire to dye his hair blue, and I laughed, offering not judgment, but solidarity. "It's funny," she said, pausing with her knife over a cutting board of bright red peppers. "I used to hear you talk about your work and I'd feel this pressure. Like I was supposed to be impressed, but I didn't know how. I didn't understand the language. Now I just hear you talking about your day. And I used to hear you talk about the kids and the PDA, I confessed, and I felt like you were speaking a language I'd never be allowed to learn. I thought you were telling me my life was empty because it didn't look like yours." She put the knife down and leaned against the counter, a thoughtful expression on her face. "Maybe we were both just shouting at each other from opposite shores, Elle. We never thought to ask if there was a bridge." "I think we finally built one," I said. "No," she corrected me, a small smile playing on her lips. "You built it. With your fancy reverse mortgages and your spreadsheets. I just brought the hammer and nails." We both laughed, a genuine, shared sound of amusement and affection. The old envy was gone, replaced by a mutual, if sometimes wry, respect for our different strengths. The backyard was filled with the sounds of a family at ease. Tom was at the grill, arguing playfully with my oldest nephew about the proper way to cook a burger. Leo, now a lanky 10-year-old, was demonstrating a complicated soccer move for my mother, who watched with rapt attention from her comfortable chair. I was setting plates on the picnic table when he came over to me, a blade of grass stuck in his hair. "Aunt Eleanor," he said. "Yes, sweetie. When I get my license, will you teach me how to drive your car?" The question was so simple, so pure. It was a million miles away from the little boy who had pointed his finger and delivered a line that had shattered my world. That boy saw a borrowed object. This boy saw a skill, a privilege, something to aspire to that was intrinsically linked to me. He was asking me to share a piece of my world with him. "I would love that, Leo," I said, my voice catching slightly. "But you have to promise to be a very, very careful driver." He beamed, a wide, gap-toothed grin. "I promise," he shouted before running off to rejoin the game. I stood there for a moment, watching him go, the plastic plates heavy in my hands. I looked at the scene before me, the chaotic, beautiful, imperfect tapestry of my family. I wasn't on the periphery anymore. I was standing right in the heart of it. My thread had found its place. I wasn't the maiden aunt, the lonely career woman, the object of pity or envy. I was Aunt Eleanor, the one with the cool blue car, the one who understood numbers, the one who could be counted on, the one who belonged. The drive home that night was different from all the others. The sun had set, leaving the sky a deep, bruised purple. The highway was quiet. I drove with the windows down, letting the cool night air rush in, carrying the scent of cut grass and distant rain. There was no turmoil in my mind, no replaying of painful scenes, no ghosts of past struggles. There was only a profound and peaceful sense of contentment. I thought about the word rich. For so long, I had equated it with the balance in my bank account, the deed to my condo, the title to my car. I had achieved that richness, but it had felt hollow, a victory celebrated in an empty room. Now I understood. Richness wasn't the solitary accumulation of assets. It was the ability to share them. It was the coffee I bought for my sister in a hospital cafeteria. It was the financial plan that allowed my mother to live out her days in her own home. It was the promise of a driving lesson for a 10-year-old boy who now looked at me with admiration. My success hadn't been a lonely pursuit after all. It had been, without my even knowing it, the slow, patient construction of a bridge back to the very people I thought I had left behind. My life was not a story of a woman who chose a career over a family. It was the story of a woman who had to build her own world so that she could, in the end, help to save theirs. I pulled into the parking garage beneath my building, the hum of the engine a familiar, comforting sound. I ran my hand over the smooth leather of the steering wheel. This car. It had been the catalyst for so much pain, but it had also been the vehicle for so much healing. It had carried me through anger and reconciliation, through crisis and peace. It wasn't a symbol of what I had, but a testament to what I had become. The solitary road I had traveled for so long hadn't led me away from family after all. It had simply been my own, winding, scenic route home.